There are forms of attraction that don't need to be loud, don't need to prove anything, and don't even need words. They come from the inner fire of someone who knows who they are. And today, if you are an Aries, you may not realize this yet. Somewhere out there, a wealthy, powerful man is being quietly pulled toward your energy, not because of how you look, not really because of what you have, but because of how you exist in the world. Over the next several minutes, this story is not about a typical pursuit. It's an invitation to understand why Aries energy has such a strong impact on people in positions of power, why the attention you're receiving is not accidental, and why this connection reaches far deeper into personal value, the soul's path, and the stage of maturity you are stepping into right now. If you feel like you're standing at a new threshold in your life, stay with me until the end. If you're ready to step into a higher value version of yourself, leave a comment saying that you're open to connections that truly match who you are. This isn't just an affirmation. It's a way of allowing yourself to align with the energy that's arriving at exactly the right moment. And if these words slow your heartbeat, even just a little, share this video, because somewhere, another Aries may need to hear this, to remember who they really are. To understand why a wealthy man might be drawn to you, we first need to return to the core of Aries itself, the primal fire that has made you different. Since the moment you entered this world, there's something unusual about Aries that most people don't notice at first. You don't walk into a room quietly, even when you say nothing. Something arrives with you, an energy that feels alive, real, impossible to ignore. It's not loud, but it refuses to stay still. And for those who are sensitive enough, your presence sends a signal. Someone here does not live halfway. Aries is ruled by Mars. In astrology, Mars is the first force that sets life into motion, not to please anyone, but to survive. It's the instinct to move forward, even when the entire path isn't visible yet. When this energy lives inside a person, it creates something unmistakable. This is someone who doesn't wait for life to happen. They step into life first. And whether you want it or not, that kind of presence creates a very primal kind of attraction. You may have wondered yourself why people notice you in ways that are hard to explain. Not because you're trying to stand out. Sometimes, you actually want peace, simplicity, something easy. But the more you try to blend in, the more out of rhythm you feel. Aries doesn't pretend well for long. You can try to stay quiet. Try to soften yourself. Try to become more manageable. But eventually, that inner fire will find its way out. Many people think Aries is strong because Aries isn't afraid. That's not entirely true. You do feel fear. You do feel hurt. You do experience loss. The difference is, you don't let fear decide that you should stop moving. You tend to step forward first and process the emotion later. And in a world obsessed with calculations and caution, that can make you look reckless. But it also means you carry a kind of vitality that money can't buy. People who have gone very far in life, especially men who have touched real power, are rarely impressed by appearances or rehearsed compliments anymore. They've heard too much. They've seen too much. They recognize instantly when someone wants something from them. What makes them pause comes from somewhere else entirely. The feeling of standing before someone who doesn't need to prove who they are. Someone who doesn't bow, but also doesn't challenge. Someone who simply stands firm. Aries often doesn't realize that this is the effect they have. You don't think of yourself as special. You're just trying to live in a way that doesn't suffocate you. But that refusal to compromise yourself creates a very clear energetic field. It makes the world around you feel more real. And for a man who's used to control, used to leading, standing in front of someone who can't be easily managed, awakens something complex inside him. Maybe you've heard it before. Don't be so blunt. Calm down. Why do you always have to go first? Maybe you've wondered whether you should slow down, soften yourself, or hide parts of who you are to make life easier. But if you're listening now, and something feels painfully familiar, you already know the truth. Every time you try to do that, you shrink just a little. Not in the eyes of others, but in your own sense of self. Aries cannot tolerate living in that state for very long. Your primal fire was never meant to burn quietly forever. It needs space. It needs movement. It needs the feeling of being fully itself. When you're placed inside structures that are too tight, Your reaction is rarely sadness. It's restlessness, a subtle but persistent feeling that something is calling you forward, even when you don't yet know where you're meant to go. In astrology, Aries, standing at the very beginning of the zodiac, is not an accident. You represent the moment when movement begins after stillness, and every beginning carries a certain kind of chaos. Not everyone is ready to live alongside that energy. Some people see you as too much, too fast, too real, but others recognize something else entirely. They remember the feeling they once had, when they believed life was an adventure worth stepping into. When a wealthy man begins to feel drawn to your energy, it rarely happens loudly. More often, it shows up as quiet observation, questions that seem casual, or simply the sense that he feels more awake when he's near you. Not because you're doing anything special for him, but because you're not trying to become the version of yourself he expects. That freedom is magnetic, and at the same time, it makes people cautious. There is a very delicate boundary here. Not everyone knows how to approach fire without wanting to control it. And Aries, if you're not fully aware, can easily confuse attention with understanding. You're used to acting quickly, feeling intensely. So sometimes, you have to learn how to pause, to observe who truly respects your fire, and who is simply drawn to its heat. If you've ever entered relationships that began with intensity, but later left you feeling suffocated, it may not be because you were wrong. It may simply be because you stood too close to someone who loved your light, but didn't know how to live with it. Fire was never meant to be locked inside glass. It needs to be seen, and it needs to be respected. Perhaps this is the moment to ask yourself a very simple question. When I am most fully myself, who still stays? You don't need to answer right away, but if this question leaves you quiet longer than usual, you may be touching a very honest layer of awareness. And that's often where change begins. If you've ever felt the need to apologize for having too much energy, too much emotion, too much life, pause here for a moment. Remember this. Not everyone is meant to live gently. Some souls are meant to initiate. Some are meant to ignite, even when that means they are not always understood. Aries is one of them. If these words are helping you recognize a part of yourself you once tried to hide, you can leave a very small sign, just enough to say, I'm still here. I'm listening. Sometimes, acknowledging your own presence is a courageous act in itself, because it is this very primal fire, the thing you may have believed made you different and hard to belong. That is the first thing a wealthy, experienced man notices when he steps into your energetic field. But that attraction is only the surface. Behind it lies a much deeper story, one involving power, choice, and challenges not everyone is ready to face. And that is where this journey truly begins. There is a very subtle moment when a man who has gone far in life starts paying attention to someone new. It's not loud, not rushed, often not even obvious. It's like a brief pause inside a mind that is always moving, a slowing down, a sensation without a clear name. And usually, it doesn't arrive when he sees something he wants to possess, but when he encounters something that cannot be grasped through power. Successful men, especially those who have built real status, often carry strong Saturn or Pluto energy tied to discipline, control, responsibility, influence. They're used to carrying weight, used to making decisions, used to standing in positions where others wait for answers. Their lives are rarely without structure. Everything has a plan, a goal, a boundary, and because of that, many of their raw, instinctual emotions are placed far in the background. Not because they don't matter, but because there is no longer time to feel them. When someone like this enters the energetic space of an Aries, what they feel first is rarely attraction in the usual sense. It's something more alive, as if a door has suddenly opened and fresh air rushes in. You're not trying to impress them. You're not trying to understand their world. You're not even trying to step into the system they've built. You're just there, real, alive, unapologetic, unneeding. And for a moment, their familiar layers of control loosen. Aries carries an energy that isn't anchored to outcomes. You do what you do because you want to do it, not because of what it will earn you. In a world where so many relationships are built on need, exchange, and advantage, The presence of someone who needs nothing from the other becomes incredibly rare. Not because you're arrogant, but because you've learned how to stand on your own feet. There is a truth that often surprises many people, including Aries themselves. A wealthy man is not drawn to you because you need him. In fact, need feels so familiar to him that it almost becomes invisible. What makes him pause is the moment he realizes you remain fully yourself, whether he is there or not. You don't change your voice. You don't edit your personality. You don't shrink your dreams to fit inside his world. You don't demand, but you also don't wait. And it is precisely that freedom that creates such a deep attraction. When a man is used to control, it is rare for him to encounter someone he cannot assign a clear role to. You are not looking for protection. You are not rebelling against power. You are simply not defined by it. And that does two things at once. It makes him curious, and it forces him to face a question he rarely asks himself. If I don't need to prove anything, then who am I? The attraction here doesn't come from imbalance. It comes from parallel presence. You don't stand below him, waiting to be lifted. You stand beside him, even if your starting points are different. And at a deeper level, this awakens something very old inside him. Something primal. Something long unnamed. The part that responds to life itself, not achievement. The part that once knew how to move forward, without guarantees. You may have felt this already, in glances that linger, just a second longer than usual. In the way he listens, when you talk about ordinary things. In attention that isn't loud, but steady. Not because you're doing anything special for him, but because near you, he is allowed not to be strong all the time. And for someone who is used to carrying weight, that feeling is both comforting and very hard to walk away from. Aries rarely sets out to create space for others to lean on. And yet, the paradox is that this very lack of intention makes people want to stay close. You don't promise. You don't reassure. You don't soothe someone's insecurity with words. You keep living. And by doing so, you remind others that life is not only a sequence of responsibilities, it is also the experience of being fully alive in each moment. In the modern world, where so many relationships are built to fill personal voids, independence is often mistaken for coldness. But at a deeper level, independence is the ability to not place the weight of your worth on someone else's shoulders. When two people meet from a place of inner fullness, the connection stops being attachment and becomes choice. And that is one of the rarest forms of connection there is. You may have wondered why a man who has everything would be drawn to someone who seeks nothing from him. But if you look deeper, you'll see that wealth does not always mean fulfillment. Many people reach the highest peaks outside, while becoming distant from the feeling of being alive within. And when they meet someone who reminds them of that feeling, the natural response is not to run away, but to move closer. Still, not every step closer comes from understanding. Some are drawn because they want to possess the source of life they sense. Some want to control what they cannot control. And this is where Aries must become especially attentive to themselves. Because not needing anyone does not mean you are immune to other people's motives. There is a very thin line between resonance and intrusion. Fire can warm, but it can also be used to light someone else's purpose. When a powerful man enters your life, the most important question is not how much he has, but how he treats your fire. Does he allow it to burn in its own rhythm? Or does he try to adjust it to fit inside his world? If you've ever felt that early attention slowly turned into invisible limits, if you've ever found yourself having to explain why you need space, why you don't want to be shaped, that may be a sign that it's time to listen more closely to your intuition. Aries instincts are strong, but sometimes you move too quickly to hear what they're saying. Perhaps what draws a wealthy man to you has little to do with what you give him, and everything to do with what you do not take away. You don't drain his energy with expectation. You don't demand guarantees to exist. You simply live. And by living this way, you allow others to remember what it feels like to be alive without being weighed down. If you're listening now and realizing that your independence once made you feel alone, notice something very small. Some people don't come to fill your emptiness. They come to stand beside you once you are already standing strong. And connections like that often arrive later, after you've stopped searching. Do you believe that independence can be a deep form of attraction? Not independence as resistance, but independence that no longer uses another person as a foundation for self-worth. If this question touches you, you may want to share your perspective, not to argue, but to recognize that others are walking the same rhythm of understanding. Because this story does not end with attraction. What follows is far more important. When power meets fire, when control brushes against freedom, there is always a deeper layer waiting to be revealed. And not everyone is ready to step into it. Some encounters enter our lives without making any noise at all. They don't immediately disrupt the old order. They don't demand instant decisions. They arrive softly, almost by accident, yet leave a resonance that lingers long afterward. For Aries, these meetings are rarely random, even when they look like coincidence on the surface. At a deeper level of astrology, there are phases in life when the soul becomes more receptive, not because you are weaker, but because you are shifting. For many Aries, this happens when the North Node is activated, or when Saturn begins to touch key points in the natal chart. These periods are quiet, but serious. They don't bring comforting promises. They bring a question. Will you continue living as you have? Or are you ready to grow in a different way? As you enter these cycles, you may find that what once felt acceptable now feels too small. Not because you want more, but because you see more clearly. Relationships that once felt enough begin to feel tight. Familiar patterns start to feel heavy. You may not yet know what comes next, but you know exactly what no longer fits. And it is in this state of uncertain, but unable to return, that certain people appear. They don't come to complete you. They don't come to save you. Sometimes, they don't even stay long enough to form a full story. But their presence is like a mirror, placed at precisely the right angle. When you look into it, you see yourself more clearly. Not the version you present, but the version you've suppressed, compromised, and postponed for far too long. For Aries, this experience feels both familiar and unfamiliar. Familiar, because deep down, you've always known you were born to live larger than what you currently have. Unfamiliar, because it's rare for someone to touch that place inside you without trying to control it. When a wealthy, experienced man enters your life at exactly this stage, the feeling isn't being chosen, it's being seen. And those two sensations are very different. Some people come and stay to build something lasting, but others appear only long enough to trigger a shift inside you, then leave once their role is complete. Not because they were careless, but because not every connection is designed to last. Some exist just long enough to make you reset your standards, just long enough for you to realize how little you once accepted for far too long. The truth is, sometimes what moves you isn't the other person at all. It's the version of you that emerges in their presence. You speak with more confidence. You think more expansively. You no longer shrink yourself to fit old expectations. And once you experience that, it becomes nearly impossible to return to who you were before. As if nothing has changed. A door has opened. Whether you walk through it or not, you've already seen what's on the other side. During cycles of soul maturity, Aries is often placed into situations that force you to ask yourself, what am I living for? And how much am I willing to give up in order not to lose myself? Awakening connections don't come to make you comfortable. They come to make you honest. Honest about your desires, your boundaries, and the truth that you are no longer the same person you were a few years ago. You may have once believed that strength meant handling everything alone, needing no one, relying on no one. But at a deeper level, this phase teaches something subtler. Standing strong doesn't mean closing yourself off. Being whole doesn't mean refusing all connection. It simply means you no longer use another person to fill the spaces you haven't yet dared to face within yourself. Looking back, you may realize that his arrival was perfectly timed. Not earlier, when you were still too willing to compromise. Not later, when you might have closed yourself completely. He arrived at the intersection, where you were strong enough, not to lose yourself, yet open enough, to be touched. And wherever that connection leads, the mark it leaves, will not fade easily. There's a very specific feeling, when you realize, you deserve more, than what you once accepted. It isn't loud. It doesn't explode. It arrives as a clear stillness. A place where you no longer need to convince yourself to stay in situations that make you smaller. You don't necessarily cut things off immediately, but you stop making excuses, and that's often the moment real power returns to you. If you've ever met someone who made you see your life through a different lens, after only a short time, it's very likely that wasn't an ordinary relationship. Some souls come to remind us who we were before we learned to shrink ourselves, and once that memory is awakened, you no longer fall asleep inside old choices. You may not yet be able to name exactly what is changing. You just know. You no longer want to live superficially. You no longer accept connections without depth, without respect, without space for you to grow. And even though this shift happens quietly, it is reshaping how you enter every relationship from here on. Have you ever met someone who changed the way you see yourself? Not in a way that made you dependent, but in a way that revealed how deeply you had undervalued your own worth. If this question makes you pause longer than usual, you may be very close to the heart of this story, because awakening connections are never the end point. They are doors into a phase that demands greater awareness, greater clarity, and greater responsibility for your own fire. And this is when Aries must become especially mindful of how you move forward, because not every open path needs to be walked immediately. There is something not every Aries is ready to admit. A strong flame doesn't only attract attention, it draws people closer, and not every hand that reaches out comes with respect. Some come because they feel warmth, some come because they fear their own darkness, and some come because they believe they can possess what is burning. Aries carries Mars energy very clearly. It makes you live faster, feel more intensely, respond more honestly. When you love fully. When you trust completely. When you open the door, you don't stand behind it, analyzing for too long. You're used to stepping forward before you have time to doubt yourself. And that is both your greatest gift and your greatest challenge. On the path of maturity, you may have found yourself in connections that began with incredible intensity. Everything moved quickly, emotions rose high. It felt like someone finally saw you, understood your fire, wasn't afraid of how alive you are. In moments like that, it's easy to believe this is what you've been waiting for. Easy to let someone move closer, faster, when their desire and attention feel so clear. But time is always the most honest teacher. And if you're truthful with yourself, you may remember the smallest signs. The moment you began adjusting your rhythm, explaining yourself more, slowing down, not because you wanted to, but because they couldn't keep up with your fire. Moments when early attention quietly became invisible limits. And you chose silence because you didn't want to disrupt what existed. Not because you were weak, but because you know how to love deeply. And when you love deeply, you hope. You hope the other person will grow with you. You hope that if you're patient just a little longer, things will work out. But there is a subtle truth that mature souls learn, sometimes through pain. Not everyone who enters your life has the capacity to walk alongside your fire all the way through. Strong Mars energy can pull Aries into the intensity of the moment. But maturity is not about extinguishing that flame. It's about learning where it belongs, when it belongs, and with whom it belongs. Some glances are powerful, but not lasting. Some words are beautiful, but unsupported by long-term action. And some pursuits make you feel desired, but not respected. You don't need anyone to come and save you. You never have. Aries is born with the instinct to rise on their own. What you truly need, at a deeper level, is someone who is not threatened by the journey you are on. Someone who doesn't need you to become smaller, to feel secure, Someone who can stand beside your fire, without trying to control the direction it burns. In the past, you may have confused being chosen with being valued. When someone desired you, gave you special attention, it felt like you were finally seen. But over time, you realized something quietly painful. Attention did not come with space. And when a relationship requires you to constantly adjust yourself just to fit, it stops being nourishing. True worth is not measured by how many people want you. It lives in your clarity, your ability to choose who gets to stay in your world, who is allowed near your fire, who is trusted to witness you during your most fragile transitions. Not every choice is easy, but each time you choose from self-respect, you add another layer of strength to your soul. If you've ever been in a relationship where you felt you had to be twice as strong just to keep things from falling apart, listen to that feeling. Not to blame anyone, but to recognize that love should not be a place where you are constantly bracing yourself. The right connection doesn't make you weaker, and it doesn't require you to prove your worth through silent sacrifice. There is a very important moment on the Aries path when you realize you no longer want to fight just to stay in someone's life. You stop wanting to prove that you are enough. You stop spending your energy holding on to attention that lacks depth. That moment doesn't arrive loudly, it comes quietly. But from that point forward, you begin to move differently. In every relationship, not all attention is a blessing. Some attention arrives only to test whether you are aware enough to protect yourself. And when you learn to tell the difference between desire and respect, between intensity and stability, you begin to love from a different place. Not rushed, not blind, but still very real. If you're listening right now and feel a tightness in your chest, it may be because you're remembering times you loved faster than was needed. Not to regret them, but to understand that every experience carries a piece of growth. No step is wasted if you listen to what it leaves behind. What is the greatest lesson you are learning through your relationships? Maybe it's learning to slow down. Maybe it's learning to say no. Maybe it's learning to trust your intuition sooner. You don't need to answer now, but if the question lingers longer than usual, it's because your soul is ready to step into another layer. And when you begin to move in alignment with your true energy, when you stop using intensity to fill empty spaces and start using awareness to choose, everything around you shifts in very subtle ways. Not loud, not performative, but deeply real. And that's when what comes next arrives in ways you've never experienced before. There is a very special phase on the Aries journey when you no longer live to resist and no longer live to prove. You simply live. And in that moment, your fire becomes its most beautiful. Not blinding, not impulsive, but warm, clear, and far-reaching. You may not notice it, but when you stop explaining who you are, the people around you begin to see life differently. The world is deeply familiar with safe patterns. People learn to adjust themselves to fit environments, expectations, and the fear of being excluded. And within that current, the presence of an Aries living truthfully becomes a silent question. You don't just say that another way of living is possible. You live it. You move with alignment between what you feel and what you show. You are not perfect, but you are honest. And in a society exhausted by long-running performances, honesty becomes a deep form of comfort. When Aries lives in alignment, you don't need to call anyone to action. Your presence alone carries momentum. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that gently steers. Others look at you and realize how long they've postponed themselves. They see you begin again. They see you correct course. They see you speak truthfully about what you feel, and it reminds them of a part of themselves they once buried just to stay comfortable. There's a common misconception that inspiration requires leading, directing, or standing above others. But for Aries, inspiration often happens while you're simply living your life. When you leave a space that no longer respects you, when you begin again without all the answers, when you choose loyalty to your fire instead of dimming it to fit the crowd. These choices, deeply personal as they are, create social ripples you may never see. You don't know who is watching you quietly from afar, It may be someone younger, torn between truth and safety. It may be someone who has gone far, but suddenly feels empty. It may be someone who has never told you that you embody something they wish they dared to live. By living honestly, you unknowingly give them permission. If you can live this way, maybe I can too. In astrology, Aries represents the beginning, but beginnings are not glamorous moments. They are decisions to stand up without guarantees, small actions that stay faithful to inner truth. When you live like that, you don't push change through words. You become living proof. You don't tell others they should change. You show them that change is possible, and that it doesn't destroy them the way they once feared. You may have believed your life was too small to create meaningful impact, but real impact is not measured by how many people you touch directly. It's measured by how many are touched indirectly through your courage. When you say no to what exhausts you, someone else learns they are allowed to set boundaries. When you step away from a familiar path, someone begins questioning their own. And when enough questions are asked, a community begins to shift. Living in alignment does not mean Aries is always strong. It means Aries allows themselves to be tired, to doubt, without betraying their core fire. You don't pretend everything is fine when it isn't. You don't trade aliveness for artificial peace. And in that honesty, you become an anchor for those searching for another way to live. There is a quiet kind of leadership that only authentic souls carry. It's the kind where you don't try to pull anyone along, yet people still find their way to you, not because they want to become like you, but because being near you reminds them of who they really are. And this matters deeply in a society where so many people lose their identity just to belong. Your existence reminds them that belonging should never come at the cost of disappearing. If you've ever felt out of place because you didn't resemble anyone around you, it's possible you were simply arriving a little earlier than your environment. Not everyone is ready for truth at the same time, but that doesn't make your truth any less valuable. If anything, it suggests you're moving ahead. It's a rhythm few are brave enough to step into. As Aries matures, your fire no longer burns things down. It warms. It doesn't force. It invites. And those who come near don't do so because they need you. They come because they want to be close to something genuinely alive. This is the healthiest form of connection our society is quietly starving for. Whole people meeting, not to fill emptiness, but to expand space for one another. You may never fully know the impact your way of living creates. And sometimes, you don't need to. What matters is that you don't betray yourself just to be accepted. You don't dim your fire to avoid making others uncomfortable. You choose to live in alignment, even when that choice means walking alone at times. And that decision, repeated enough times, begins to shape a different world, starting very small. If you're listening now and feeling a quiet sense of peace, it may be because you've walked through enough challenges to understand that true value doesn't need noise. It needs consistency. And when consistency is lived daily, it spreads in ways you can't control, yet always arrives at exactly the right time. You don't know who is watching you and thinking, if they can live like that, maybe I can too. You don't know who is making a small decision today simply because they once saw you refuse to give up on yourself. But you can trust this. Every time you choose to live truthfully, you contribute something the world desperately needs. Not through words, but through your presence. And now that you've arrived here, it may be time to touch the final point. Not something about others, but something that returns to you. Because after all the attraction, the connections, the changes, and the quiet influence, there is still one most important question waiting to be answered. And that is where this story closes. In a very different way. Benoff, you may clearly sense that this story was never really about a wealthy man. He didn't appear to become the center. He didn't come to rewrite who you are. His presence simply reflected a truth that had always existed. You weren't seen because someone chose you. You were seen because you were brave enough to live in alignment with your values. That man didn't come to define you. He came because you had already defined yourself, and in that moment, everything shifted. You no longer stand, waiting for validation. You step forward, with the calm certainty of someone who knows who they are, knows where they're going, and knows what is worthy of entering their life. When you stop searching for external confirmation, the right connections begin to find you naturally. If you've walked this journey all the way to this point, take a moment to acknowledge yourself. Not everyone has the patience to stay, the courage to listen to something this deep, or the honesty to face who they truly are. The fact that you're still here says more about you than you may realize. If you feel you're entering a new cycle, one where half-hearted connections no longer feel acceptable, leave a clear mark. Comment that you honor your value, and choose only connections that are aligned with it. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to confirm to yourself that you're ready to release old patterns and step into a more mature layer of energy. And if these words touched you, if you feel less alone in how you see life and relationships, share this video, not loudly, just as a quiet whisper sent into the universe, that an Aries flame is burning the right way, unrushed, unafraid, unwilling to betray itself. Before you go, I want to offer you a deeply sincere thank you. Thank you for not scrolling past. Thank you for staying with yourself through this entire journey. The most important things in life never arrive in a hurry. They find those who are quiet enough to listen and brave enough to stay until the very end.